Food in anime is weird. Whenever it's on screen, a tremendous amount of focus in animation and detail is put into making it look as delicious and savory and scrumptious as possible. And in general, if your anime doesn't make food look tasty enough to plaster on a restaurant menu, then the people will be disappointed and call it low effort. This obsession in the anime industry actually originates from this show named, hold on, one second, Yoake Mai Yori Ruri no Na, which had such terrible-looking cabbages that they were ridiculed for it, and ever since, the anime industry has vowed to never make food look that stupid ever again. Perhaps due to this obsession with food, using food to convey meaning in story is relatively common practice, and some series do excellent jobs of it. Not all shows are created equal, however. The closest many shows get to meaning in their food is to use always hungry anime character trope, where one such character, usually the protagonist, especially if it's the protagonist of a shonen battle series, will have a bottomless pit of a stomach and appetite, and loves eating to an almost obsessive degree. I often view this as a representation of ambition. These characters dream big and are always being hungry for more, and are never satisfied enough not to eat more. And it's a great, if basic, representation of this to have in their body and personality. From my understanding in anime history, this particular trope was not necessarily created, but popularized by Goku, and was as a result present in many other series that soon started after Dragon Ball exploded. Two of the biggest and most famous examples of this are Luffy from One Piece and Naruto from, wait, I forgot the name. Fuck, sorry. In, that show, food is almost never really used to convey anything thematically or inform a character's personality. It feels like Naruto only eats a lot because he's the protagonist and that's what's expected of him in basic ambition, yada yada yada. Why is Choji pudgy? Is it anything about his character? No, it's just because he eats chopper rumble balls as a superpower, and so the author went, he swallows pills to get strong, and he swallow everything else too. One Piece, by contrast, I feel does a lot more than either Dragon Ball or Naruto with food. Luffy's canonical ability to eat as much as he does is explained by his stomach being made of rubber and capable of expanding as he eats, and food works its way directly into the power system for him, as many of Luffy's gear techniques require huge amounts of energy and body fuel and leave him incredibly fatigued. The power to instantly digest everything in your stomach and turn it into energy is an actual established power in the One Piece universe that doesn't require a devil fruit and is introduced by Pink Hair McGee over here. Luffy frequently uses this power throughout the entire series in order to not starve himself to death in the middle of intensive battles where he pushes his body to the limits. On Whole Cake Island, he looks like this after just a single day of intensive combat and no snacking, and it's an important plot point and character moment for him and the other major food-themed character, Sanji. Sanji is a cook, and the major part of his backstory involves him being stranded on the ocean with no food and starving for months, only being rescued within an inch of his life, and this experience greatly informs his character, being willing to serve anybody who is hungry, even if it's his enemy, and it would be in his best interests not to. We see this towards the beginning of the series when he chooses to feed Don Krieg's pirates, even though he knows is extremely likely to put himself and everyone around him in danger as soon as the enemy isn't starving. And it did. A lot of people died. I jokingly called Choji's pills the chopper rumble balls, but they really are similar, even including massive side effects after eating 3 of them. However, the meaning they have to the characters is quite different. Choji just happened to be born in a family that uses them and knows that eating the 3rd one means death, even though it really doesn't. And that's his only personal connection to the pill. By contrast, Chopper invented his rumble balls himself using his medical knowledge as a doctor, and only discovered the 3rd one is dangerous by accidentally eating 3, causing him to lose conscious control of his body and turning him into a monster that attacks indiscriminately. He's fearful of the 3rd ball, not because he'll die, but because he's afraid of what he'll become and do without control, and he knows exactly what that will be by experience because it's happened before. It terrifies him especially because it's contrary to his role as a doctor and how he identifies himself as someone who helps people rather than hurts them.
モンスターだよ。
This is not to shit on that one show with Naruto in it, but to say that food is clearly an important thing to Oda, the author of One Piece, as it plays a vital role in multiple Straw Hat personalities and informs the decisions and situations the characters find themselves participating in. Oda is able to make us cry over a bowl of rice in Wano, and this is in a show that on the surface has nothing to do about food. It's a testament to how you can use food to convey meaning and character in your worlds. But what all can food be used for, and how do we use it? I'm not actually going to be talking about any actual cooking shows other than recommending The Mermaid Princess's Guilty Pleasure, which is just delightful and full of the craziest references you've ever seen. Yes, that is Gus from Breaking Bad on your screen in a manga panel right there. Go read it. It's great. While food is meaningful and important in One Piece, it is downright sacred to Golden Kamuy. Whereas One Piece has food a commonplace staple and uses it to convey meaning once every 20 episodes or so, or occasionally throughout an entire food-based arc like Baratie and Whole Cake Island, and it sometimes feels like the cooking aspect of Sanji's backstory is completely forgotten in lieu of his womanizer traits. By contrast, Golden Kamuy uses food to convey themes, character backstories and decisions, power dynamics, violence, connecting characters, foreshadowing major plot points, and more, and it does this on an episodic basis. There are scarcely few episodes of Golden Kamuy with no food or mentions and discussions of food. It is in the very lifeblood of the show, despite not being part of the actual plot. In fact, the very first line in the series comes from Sugimoto at 203 Meter Hill just before the charge, when, starving, he eats a live ant, spits it out, and says it's sour and that he's going to eat the Russians he kills instead. This immediately sets a tone and tells us about these soldiers' situations, that they aren't happy, that their current predicament sucks, and introduces us a concept that gets brought up later, that soldiers told lies to themselves, calling the other side evil and inhuman, or in this case food, just so that they could sleep at night and force themselves to do whatever they needed to do to survive. This gets brought up more in detail later, but this is the first hint of it, the first consistency of it in the series, and it's in the very first line. We get all this from 2 lines about food as establishing the character and setting in just a couple of seconds, and a lack of food in this case is what told the story. Food is the most universal language in the entire world, and a fact of life is that everybody needs to eat. We may not see eye to eye, and we may not eat the same thing, but we all eat. And what we eat and why can tell us a lot about people, about our cultures and beliefs. Islamic and Jewish people don't eat pork, and Hindu don't eat beef due to their religious beliefs. Vegans care for animals and don't feel they can personally participate in the consumption of living things. Vegans that also try to make their dog or cats vegan are animal abusers who just do it to feel superior to others. What you eat can say a lot about where you're from. American cuisine looks far different than Russian or Scottish cuisine, which looks far different than African cuisine. Ox penis is something occasionally eaten in China, and pufferfish in Japan. Whale skin and blubber were eaten by the various Inuit people, along with most every other part of the whale, due to availability. The land we live on can dictate what we eat in a very real way. Most places with strong cultural beliefs against eating certain foods have a lot more variety in edible resources than other places. Many Hindu people refuse to eat beef or are straight vegetarians, but they mostly live in places where other types of food are easy to come by. By contrast, you would be very hard-pressed to find a vegetarian Inuit in history, simply because that's just not sustainable where they live, and their beliefs reflect that. Food shapes culture, and cultures that historically had less food available to them are strongly abhorrent in letting any part of their food go to waste. And many indigenous people historically see using as much as humanly possible from the animals you hunt as a necessary part of honoring and thanking that animal and not letting anything go to waste. This cultural aspect is a big aspect in Drifting Dragons, which is currently my favorite manga. Among other things, Drifting Dragons preaches hunting etiquette and hunting sustainability, ensuring that you use every single piece of your prey to its fullest extent. The series follows a crew of what are called drakers, which are, in-universe, essentially sky whalers who hunt dragons. Upon slaying a dragon, they carve it up and butcher it, process and render as much of it as they possibly can, and sell their resources to nearby towns, and this is how the crew makes their living. It is, contrary to what you might expect based off the premise, thematically very anti-industrial whaling, and is more so in support of the whaling performed by indigenous cultures sustainably for thousands of years prior to modern industrial whaling. The crew is careful to not take more than they can process and is loath to waste any part of their hunt, something modern whaling does in spades. From a single corpse, they carve and butcher the meat, render the fat into oil, extract liquid and fluids from the brain, which is used for medicine, harvest the bones as raw materials for pins and needles, or even make musical instruments. The hide and skin can be tanned and leathered. There is no part of the dragon that goes to waste, and this is something that completely defines the culture of the world of Drifting Dragons. Dragon material is used as part of everyday life for an uncounted amount of people, and every new place they visit has new, different, and unique ways of preparing food and using dragon as ingredients. Drifting Dragons has our characters partake in fancy foods and new recipes at every opportunity it gets, and at the end of the chapter, we'll even share the recipe. There's an average of almost one recipe per chapter in the series, which is insane. I've actually made several of them myself, and they taste delicious. You just gotta swap out dragon meat for whatever you think is the appropriate equivalent is for the meal. Unless you get really lucky and find dragon in your local deli aisle, of course. I haven't, but, I try I look every time. These recipes are incredibly varied and inspired by recipes from all over the world in real life, to reflect the fact that the characters in universe are, going all over the world. As a matter of fact, there are very, very few Japanese-themed recipes in this series, and to this day, after over 100 chapters, rice hasn't appeared as an ingredient in a single one of them, which is kind of crazy, actually. It's really, really unique for a cooking manga. They make Cubano sandwiches, hot pot and fondue, goulash a la diavola, meat and pepper buns, hunter stew. Hell, they even use a crock pot at one point. Well, it's not a crock pot, but it's like an older version of a crock pot before crock pots were invented. Food is used to convey setting here, coloring each location they visit with its own unique version of dragon cuisine. Food can also be used to tell a story. In Chapter 3, when we are meeting new characters still, we are introduced to a character named Vanabelle aboard the ship. She's quiet but tough and extremely fucking good at her job. She is tied for most skilled Draker aboard the crew with Mika. A big part of Vanabelle's character is that while she cares and connects with her close friends, she keeps to herself and doesn't talk about her past that much, expressing she joins the crew because she had no place to belong. During the later portions of the chapter, she is hanging out with a hungry Mika. One of Mika's traits is that he is a foodie gourmand obsessed with dragon cuisine, and she walks in on him raiding the kitchen because he's hungry and decides on a whim to connect with him by making him a meal in lieu of the ship's chef, and makes a meal that she expresses comes from her homeland. She says she can only make a close approximation because of the ingredients on hand, and Mika gets her to promise to make it for him again one day when they have the proper ingredients. The recipe is called pressed dragon terrine, and the recipe given to us is the incomplete version she made for Mika. This kind of sits for a while as Vanabelle is further characterized and hinted at for a long time. Jump ahead 60 chapters to chapter 62, and we're at the very end of Vanabelle's arc, taking place at her hometown. It's one of the best arcs in the series, to be honest. Towards the end of it, Vani is intending to leave the crew and return to her hometown. Not for desire, but out of a sense of duty for spoilers! Just so many spoilers! And after telling the crew that, Mika knocks on her door that evening after everyone went to sleep and asked her to fulfill her promise and make him proper dragon terrine. The chapter slows down and we watch the two characters make their way to the kitchen, making small talk. There's a quietness in the air as, once again, it's night and everyone is asleep except for the two of them. There's a comfort to it and a clear and visible bond as they quietly go about making their meal, but it's not romantic. There's also a slight tension between them, as she knows he's probably intending to try to convince her to stay. Vanabelle is notably avoiding eye contact, trying to just go through the motions. He asks her, "Are you sure about this?" And she replies, "Yeah." "You know, you won't be able to eat fresh dragon anymore." "I know." "I see." The dish is finished without any fanfare. Pressed dragon terrine version 2. He takes a bite. "Vani, this is killer." She looks at him directly for the first time that night and smiles. She takes a bite from her own plate and watches him eat his food, no doubt thinking that this might be the last time they share a meal together. Ah, so good. Dragon meat sure is tasty. And we get to eat as much of it as we want. Talk about luxury. Living in the sky's got its perks, huh? I swear, nothing's hitting the spot quite like dragon. He's laying it on as thick as a jar of molasses tucked between femboy thighs, and she rolls her eyes. Then the evening is finished, and we get the updated version of the recipe. And that's the end of the chapter. We don't get an answer here, and this isn't the end of the arc. He hasn't convinced her to change his mind, but Mika has expressed himself in a way here that nobody else could, and there's a sense of finality and futility to it. He's saying through this chapter that he wants her to stay, and he's going to try to tempt her back, but he's not going to argue against her, and it's her decision. He's not going to beg her to stay because it's not his life. But through this, he's able to express his desire for her to stick around, while also giving them a proper chance to say farewell. There's a sense that it would be okay after this to split paths. In fact, he's specifically releasing her from a promise, telling her that it's okay to leave, just that he doesn't want her to. All in a poetic and largely silent way that forces her to remember everything they've been through together throughout the series. It's a brilliant scene. And it's in part a brilliant scene because of how wordless it is. They are talking, yes, but nothing they are really saying to each other is ever said out loud. It's all between the lines, a communication that is clear to them and doesn't need to be said precisely because of their bond, visualized through the making of a familiar but now complete meal, filled with the things they didn't have before, just like their relationship. Drifting Dragons is exceedingly good at conveying thoughts through character acting and expression, and showing dynamics through careful word choice like this. In fact, there's not a single thought bubble in the entire series. The character writing throughout the whole manga is done like this. It's really incredible stuff. If you'd like to know more about Drifting Dragons, please check out my entire essay on Drifting Dragons, except that it's actually over on my other, bigger Monster Hunter related channel. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. The reason it's on that channel is instead of this anime and story focused one will be clear when you watch it. Food is the most universal language, and it might just be the most meaningful one as well. Offering someone food as a form of thanks is a lot more meaningful than just saying thanks, for example. It's a way we connect to people, and it's why most first dates are at restaurants. It's even a language that can transcend species. We train animals by offering food as rewards, and pets are often most attached to the person who feeds them. Food is one of the most important aspects to who we are. It's how we connect, and it's how we make peace, and there's a lot of examples of this in Golden Kamuy. To be honest, there's kind of too many examples of food usage in Golden Kamuy to narrow down and talk in depth. So honestly, let's speedrun this shit. Here's some fun ways to use food in writing, as shown through Golden Kamuy. Sharing a meal and crossing cultural cuisine is used repeatedly throughout the series to bond characters and introduce them to foreign cultures and traditions, and a meal is usually shared anytime the main party adds or loses members. How about the time they made a meal look like the Last Supper and use it to foreshadow a betrayal using Judas? Tsurumi establishes a power dynamic by eating dango casually in front of Sugimoto while he's got guns pointed at him and not offering him any food, and further demonstrates this power dynamic by stabbing him through the face using the dango sticks. That same Tsurumi has a bonding moment with Tanigaki, one of his soldiers, who offers him a story that ends with his best friend dying in his arms, deaf and blind from injuries, not knowing who was around him during his last moments. Tanigaki was able to communicate with his dying friend and tell him who he was by feeding him a bite of modified konomochi, a recipe they shared from their childhood to comfort him during his last moments. Tsurui asks Tanigaki to make him some as well, and uses this to manipulate and garner affection and loyalty from his soldier, though I believe it was also at least partially genuine. Dried persimmons are used to represent Sugimoto's life before the war, and that he wishes he could go back and have one again. I made a whole video focused on this scene on the channel, actually, link in the description. There's just so many more, it's insane. Food is fucking everywhere in Golden Kamuy, it really is. I think I'm starting to run out of things to say, but what I want you to do is really think about the next time you see food being prepared in a show or series you experience, and ask yourself what the scene is trying to convey. When Dungeon Meshi intercuts between Senshi prepping kelpie meat and Marcel using the kelpie fat to make soap, and they are both saying their cooking steps out loud, is it just to be funny because one is edible and one isn't? Or is it trying to show that the two characters are more similar than they look and either are willing to admit? When Napoleon Dynamite feeds his llama like this...
Tina, you fat lard, come get some dinner! Tina, eat. Eat the food. Eat the food!
What does that tell you about his character? When Choji eats his rumble ball... Oh, fuck, I got it! The show's called Naruto! Thank you for watching, gentles and ladymen. I hope you enjoyed. I don't post often, but I always post when I have something I want to say and express. Future topics I have in mind and may get to include how Kizumonogatari uses visual language to define humanity, or how a large chunk of anime fans don't understand the good slave owner fallacy, and how some shows use this to justify some pretty fucked up shit. Shield Hero. Please consider subbing, even though I post like twice a year. I'd really appreciate it, and go check out the Drifting Dragons video in the description, and the other videos on my channel. Okay, bye!